So today, like I say, we are going to talk about the job interview. So first off, I want you to pat yourself on the back. If you have gotten the job interview, congratulations. Take a few moments to do what I call the happy dance, but then know that in turn, this is really when the work begins. So because you got the job interview, it means that you have a very effective resume that stood out to the employer, and that employer has decided they want you to come in and interview. When I say come in, we're going to talk about some of the creative ways that some of these employers have designed to accommodate you due to the pandemic as well. So you're going to learn today that some of our interviewing techniques have changed and they're not exactly the way they used to be or the way we think they should be. So after completing this section, you're going to learn how to prepare for an interview. You're also going to know the various different types of interviews. A lot of times it's easy to think that an interview is just going to be you and I, and that's it. But we're going to talk more about some of the changes that have happened in interviewing. I'm going to teach you how to know how to best communicate during the interview, meaning you will know exactly what the employer is looking for when they're asking you some of these questions. I know that in the past I have been in an interview and I've often said to myself, I don't know what you want me to say here. So we're going to really cover how do you actually answer those questions appropriately for what the employer wants to hear. And then also, I'm going to teach you about the STAR method. And you're going to be able to retrieve that when you're actually at the interview. Retrieve it meaning I'll teach you how to put it into the long-term memory bank so that when you are actually at the interview, you can retrieve it and talk more about it at the interview. And then we're going to talk about the follow-up. What type of follow-up do you do after the interview? Do you send a thank you note? So we'll talk more about that. First, I want to talk to you about the interview preparation. So you have gotten the call to come in for the interview. Congratulations. And like I had just said, the work now begins. So I want you to first take a few minutes and research the company that you have just applied for and that you are just going to go in now for the interview. Even though you may have researched it in the past, I want you to refresh your memory and go back in, Google them, go on their website, learn as much as you can about the company before you go in for the interview, but make sure that you're prepared. I work for a pretty prominent meaning a lot of people knew of this nonprofit. And I interviewed a gentleman one time and he said to me, "What do you do here?" So it's very important that you know exactly what type of job and what the company does that you are going in to interview for. Also, I want you to be aware of the skills that they're looking for. So oftentimes companies will have their own terms within the company, but they mean the same thing. So for instance, they could call it customer service in one company, and in a different company, they could call it customer relations. The key is to use the terms that that company uses. So if they call it customer relations, that's what you want to call it when you're at the interview. Another thing that's so super important is make sure that you check your attitude. It is very important to let go of any past hurts or past resentments that you may have towards your old employer, and make sure that your attitude is in the right space before you go into the interview. Another thing that's super important is I always recommend that you go into the bathroom before you go to the interview and just look at yourself. Make sure that everything is in its place and where it needs to be. One time when I interviewed a gentleman, he had something green on his tooth. And I didn't know him well enough to say, "Excuse me, sir, you have something green on your tooth." But it distracted me for the whole interview. So make sure that everything is where it needs to be and in its right place just by taking a quick glance in the mirror. When you're actually scheduling the interview, that is the time to ask some questions. Okay. You can ask the person who is scheduling the interview with you, oh, what type of interview is this going to be? And again, we're going to break down the different types of interviews so you're going to know a little more about the different interviews that you may be walking into, but I'm going to prepare you as much as I possibly can. You want to make sure that you know where the interview is going to be held. Okay, it could be virtually, but it could be also where you're going to a building where you're going to be interviewed with other people. Just make sure that you know for sure how to get there. If there's going to be a parking issue, make sure you just ask about parking while they're talking to you and setting up the interview. Um, and then the preparation starts. So I want you to study your skills, your experiences. make sure that you are prepared to discuss any employment gaps that you may have. Um, make sure that when you're talking to the employer that you're using the terms that they are looking for. Also make sure that you have a positive attitude, and then make sure that you look good, that everything is in its place and where it needs to be. You also want to look as professional as possible. So what we tell everybody is, as far as dress, we suggest that you dress one step above what the industry calls for. So let me give you an example. If you're going in for a landscaping position, and you're going to be applying and interviewing for a landscaper. Well, a landscaper on a regular basis typically wears jeans, steel toe boots, safety vest, t-shirt, hard hat, and safety glasses. Well, you don't necessarily go into the interview dressed that way. What we say is you go a step above. So you can still wear the steel toe boots, that's fine. But we ask or suggest that you put on maybe khaki pants or a pair of blue pants. In addition to that, we suggest that you wear a long sleeve button down shirt. You certainly do not have to wear a tie, but just make sure that you're clean, and that your hair is combed and where everything is in the place where it needs to be. But again, that's just one step above as to what the landscaper would be wearing. Now, I touched base a little bit on the different types of interviews. And again, it's easy for us to assume or to think that the interview is just going to be you and I. But what we have found, especially during the pandemic, there's been a lot of changes in the way companies are interviewing. So one way is through telephone screening. You actually could do a whole interview just through the telephone. And that could be with one people all the way up to many people who are on a conference call and they are interviewing you over the phone. Sometimes you'll have one person who's asking all the questions. Sometimes I've been in an interview before where each person takes a question. So you don't know for sure how it's going to be, but the key is to be prepared for whatever platform they're going to use to interview you. Be prepared to be flexible with that platform. Another one is our most common is our in-person screening, okay? And then we have the selection interviewing. We have the behavioral interviewing. Let's get back to the selection interviewing. That could be multiple interviews, and you may meet with multiple people. What they're all doing is they're evaluating your skills and your ability to fit in with the organization. So a lot of times with selection interviews, you could actually be with different departments too. So it could be one supervisor from this department, and then you have another supervisor from a different department. The behavioral interviewing is to provide more information about how do you actually handle stress on the job. So it could be stress, and it could also be your personality, your character. The questions would require how do you handle work-related situations, okay, on the job. The STAR technique is going to be the one that's going to help you to prepare for the behavioral interview. And again, we're going to get into the STAR technique in just a little bit here, so you're going to know exactly what that is. There's also the group or the peer group interview, and that one is the opportunity to meet and talk with many different coworkers. It could be a part of determining whether or not you're going to fit in. So with a peer group interview, it could be where you had the interview, you have completed it now, and I introduce you to two people who are going to give you a tour of the factory. Those two people are also what are called the peer group interview, because guaranteed when they're done walking you around with the tour, I'm going to ask them how you were with them. Okay, so again, it could be another technique to find out, are you going to be able to fit in here? It's best that you communicate your best image. So it is important to be prepared before the interview. Pick out your interview uniform, I call it, before the interview. If you don't have money to go out and get a fancy interview uniform to wear, get a hold of the Salvation Army. We have, like in Duluth here, we have CHUM, the Damiano Center. There are all different types of programs out there where you can get an interview clothing, but please don't wait until the day of the interview to do that. Prepare yourself ahead of time. Get everything organized early. Have copies of everything that you need and ready to go in your portfolio. I always recommend that you bring at least 5 resumes in your portfolio. Your portfolio also is an excellent place to keep all of your certificates. It's also a great place to keep your letter of recommendations, and it's a great place to keep your references. So now I've had many people ask me, well, when do I give them my references, Glory? Do I give them the references when I apply or when? The answer is when they ask for them, okay? So I want you to have them in your portfolio because at the end of the interview, they may say to you, Glory, did you bring your references with you today? And you can say, yes, I did. Pull them out of your portfolio and just leave them on the table. When you bring your certificates, I want you to bring copies of your certificates because even though they may not ask you for them, I want you to pull them out of your portfolio at the end of the interview and leave them on the table as well. They may not pay attention to them while you're in the room, but as soon as you walk out, they're going to scoop up all of the paperwork that you have left behind and take a second look at it. And that's exactly what you want them to do, okay? During the interview too, it's important that you are sending good signals. So what they say is that more than 80% of all of our communication is through body language. Isn't that incredible? More than 80%. So I've heard some professionals say 85% is body language. So please remember that when you are at the interview, if you are doing it virtually, my camera is right in front of me, so I do my absolute best to practice good eye contact with the camera as well. You're still being judged by whether or not you can carry good eye contact, what you're wearing. Okay, you don't want it to be too bright and flamboyant, but you also don't want it to be where you kind of are the same color as your background. Okay, because then you look washed out. Um, that's one of the things that we can do here at the Career Force too, is we can practice with you if you are doing a virtual interview, we can do that where I can tell you, okay, the lighting isn't good, or your background has, a color crayon, it's all over the wall, so we need to move you somewhere else. Um, my point is that we can practice all of this with you so that you'll be able to be prepared. Art, did you have a question?
Yeah, I do have a couple of questions. I've been able to answer some of them in the
Okay,
chat, and I'll do that as much as I can so we can get through the material as quickly as
excellent.
we can.
Thank
Two
you.
questions. One is specific to something you just mentioned. In a video interview, is there any advice on what works well as far as clothing for how you're viewed over the internet? I'm setting that up. Before Glory answers, I am going to send everyone a link to a video that we did previously that deals specifically with video interviewing, and you can watch that when you have time. But Glory, what are your thoughts?
Yes, excellent. I think that's an excellent question, and more employers are interviewing this way. So what we recommend is that you wear something that is of neutral color. So you don't want it to be too flamboyant, but you also don't want it to be the same color as your background. So the reason that I liken it to that is because I want you to be aware of your setting. So for instance, when you look behind in my background, I have a bunch of pictures of horses. If I were to be at an interview, I would not have that type of background because you don't want your background to be more distracting than the employer paying attention to you during the interview. Now, likewise, I don't recommend that you wear like a scarf, very loud scarf or a very loud hat. I want you to get a hold of us also because we will practice with you and give you some suggestions. You also want to be aware of your lighting. So oftentimes if you have lighting coming from behind you, it can wash you out, and that could be even like sunlight. A lot of people will have sunlight and white curtains. Well, that just washes everything out, including you, over the camera, but you're not going to know that unless you get some feedback from like someone on like us, who we can kind of give you some insight on how you look. Art, did
I
you have
would like to
anything you
echo
wanted to
that.
add? Yes.
Yeah, I do. I just want to echo that I was on a meeting yesterday with someone, and they were set up with their window right behind them. And actually, I've seen much worse, but when he moved his head back or forth, he would go dark and then light and washed out. So what we did was we just turned his computer around to his wall, completely different. Now I could focus in on what he was saying rather than the distractions. Did have another question about eye contact. What if you have a really hard time with eye contact, but you know you're being judged on it? What are some tactics to put the employer at ease when you can't or you feel very comfortable looking directly at them.
Oh, I think that is such an excellent point. In addition to that, there are some cultures that they consider it disrespectful to carry eye contact. But here's what I tell everybody. During the interview, you need to play the game, okay? So you might not wear your interview uniform every day, all day, but you need to wear it when you're going to interview. You need to do the same with your eye contact. So what they say for sociology is that eye contact is best when carried for 3 seconds. So what I can do is I can look and count in my head 1, 2, 3, and look away. That's appropriate. If you struggle with eye contact, you still need to practice and play the game for the interview. After you have the job, then you can practice your own beliefs. You don't have to necessarily have eye contact then at all times, but it is important during the interview to do your absolute best to practice it because you are being judged. A lot of people will judge you and think that you're hiding something if you aren't practicing good eye contact. I don't make these rules up. It's kind of the way society looks at things. So again, I call it play the game. Okay. One of the things too that I want you to do when you're going to the interview is the night before, I always recommend that you drive by the place. So our office moved 1 block down and we did this about 5 years ago. I still to this day will have people say, oh, I know where your office is located. And I'll say, well, do you want me to give you directions or the address? Oh, no, I know where it's located. And then they'll show up to the appointment with me a half hour late saying, well, I went down to your old office. I didn't even know that you had moved. So please make sure you know where the office is, where you're going to be interviewed. Please drive by it the night before. Here in Duluth, we have terrible construction going on right now. So every time when I'm coming to work, I don't know for sure if the road is going to be clear for me to even be able to get through. So that's why I'm recommending that you drive by the night before to make sure that construction isn't going to hold you up or that you don't have possibility of getting a flat tire by hitting a pothole on your way to driving to the interview. We have that happen here in Duluth all the time, okay? Don't show up for the interview a half hour early. That's creepy, okay? But I do want you to show up 15 minutes early for the interview. That way it gives you a little bit of time. Once you go into the room, so you're not in the interview room yet, but you're going into the room where you typically have a point of contact. So that person could be the receptionist, could be someone who's just sitting at the desk there. However, it's the person who calls and lets the interviewer know you're here for the interview. That person, I want you to be able to have a little bit of small talk with. I want you to be nice to them and maybe have a little story. You could talk about the weather. Just say, hi, how are you today? Nice to see you. Or you could compliment them, not in a creepy way, but just have a little bit of conversation with them because here's what typically happens. After you visited with them and then you get called back to the interviewer is 9 times out of 10 going to come up and talk to the person at the receptionist desk, that first point of contact, and say, what did you think of this person? Now, I had this actually happen where I was going to hire a person. They interviewed really well with me, but I always would come out and ask Miss Jackie, who was sitting at the receptionist desk, what did you think? And she said to me the one time, oh my goodness, you're going to hire him, aren't you? And I said, well, no, not necessarily, Miss Jackie. I want to hear your opinion. She said, well, he came into the interview, one, with his cell phone. Please leave your cell phone in the car. Okay. Two, he answered the cell phone while he's sitting there. And then three, he swore at the person on the other end and said, I'm in an interview. I'll call you when I'm done. So my point is that if this person was going to treat somebody that they so-called know that way and are swearing at them, what are they going to do on the job? So I didn't hire the person. So remember that your interview starts from the moment that you walk in that door. It actually starts from the moment that the phone call comes to you asking you to come in for the interview, okay? Handling some of the tough questions. Now, I absolutely love this sandwich method. I think that it's a really good example, and it's one that is good to, you can recall it when you're at the interview. You know, let's face it, if you really want the job and you're at the interview, you want the job really bad, it's easy to get nervous and to even forget your name, let alone forget how you're going to talk about some of your skills. So the sandwich method is a great way to help you to remember. So the sandwich method means you're going to talk about something positive, then you're going to talk about something negative, but you're going to turn it back into something positive. Okay. So I'm going to give you an example of that as we kind of go along here. But first, I want to be able to give you the definition. So the key points are you give direct, honest answers. Okay. You ask questions in return. Sometimes it's hard to think of questions, so I want you to be prepared to anticipate some of the questions and what they would be and practice beforehand. With the sandwich model, you're going to use a positive statement followed by a negative situation and ending it with a positive statement of how you overcame the problem or the situation. It's important to focus on your best skills and the skills that the employer is looking for. So let me give you an example of the sandwich method. Okay, so let's say that we were talking about, let's say Excel, for instance. Okay, so Excel is a really awesome tool. Okay. Now, for a negative, I could say, you know, I am familiar with Excel, but I can't say that I'm profound at using it. But I want to let you know that I'll take a refresher course before my first day of employment because I haven't used Excel for a while. And then that will help me to brush up on some of my skills again. So do you see how I took it from a positive, Excel is positive, to I haven't used it for a while, so I'm going to brush up on my skills. And positive would be then I will be ready to use Excel my first day of employment. Okay, do you see how I turn that into something positive? Some of the difficult questions that they may ask you could be, tell me about your worst boss. Ooh, that's a tough question. If you're asked that, I want you to make sure that you keep it positive, okay? Let me give you a good example. If they ask you, tell me about your worst boss, you could say something like this. Like, you know, my worst boss was actually my best boss at the same time. Because what I found was that if I didn't understand what my boss was asking me to do, if I went and said, you know, could you give me some more clarification on exactly how you want me to handle this? They would give me better clarification, and then I was able to do the job exactly the way they wanted me to do it. Okay, so see how you took something that was negative, turned it back into something positive. Another question they may ask that's a difficult one is, what planet would you be and why? Another one that I've heard before is, if you were a bird, what kind of bird would you be? Or if you were a tree, what kind of tree would you be? Here's the point that they want to get out of that. One, they're trying to catch you off guard. But two, it's an indirect way of asking you, how are you feeling about yourself today? So let me give you an example. If you were a tree, what kind of tree would you be? One of the good examples that I would use personally is a palm tree. The reason I would use a palm tree is because when a storm comes through, their roots are so deep that the palm tree will actually could even hit the ground, but it bounces right back up. So now what did I just say about myself indirectly? That a storm may come through, I might fall over, but I'm going to bounce right back up and I'm coming back, okay? So that's one of the reasons. Please just don't say this. That's the dumbest question I've ever heard, even though it may be. Know that that's what they're trying to get out of you is, how are you feeling about yourself today? But they don't come out and ask you that directly. Some of the key points too that can help you at the interview is if you can remember the STAR example, okay? So this is where you provide, excuse me, an example of your situation that you were involved in that had a positive outcome, okay? So it would be the task. So in other words, you would describe the different tasks that were involved in that situation, okay? And then you would use an action. So you're going to explain the actions that you took in that situation to resolve it, and then you're going to give the results. So describe the positive results that came from your actions. So let me think of a good example for this one. Okay, situation. I was working in a sales position and we ended up running out of the materials we were selling. Okay, so the task was I called one of our other vendors, had a discussion with them, talked with them about whether or not we could buy some of the supplies from them at wholesale cost. See how I'm taking action, okay? And as a result, they agreed to it and sent us the product, and we were able to get it to the customer. So do you see how I kind of painted a story in your head also? One of the things that I want you to remember is that you are the director of the story in my head as the interviewer. So you're the one who is going to assist me in following along what you're saying at the interview. And it works best if you put it in story form. Okay. Some of the interview questions and why the employers ask them are going to be really important for you to know. That way, when you go in there, you're going to be prepared. Now, like Art said, we're going to send you my key talking points and a copy of this. But these questions that are on here, if you can master these questions, you're going to be able to do a very, very good job at interviewing, because all of these questions are same and similar to the questions you're going to be asked at the interview. Art, did you have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to do a couple of them just so we didn't load
Yes.
all of them at the end here. So I had a
Yes.
great question. I know we're going to deal with the why your last job question, but specifically to this, if you were doing a job and you were let go due to performance issues, but that's because the needs of the job changed, the position changed, and it became a higher level position than what you were hired for. Um,
Okay.
how do you handle that question without throwing the employer under the bus?
Boy, that's a really great question. So one of the ways that you could answer it is if they say, why did you leave your last job? You could say, I ended up leaving my last job due to the actual job description itself changed so much, and they put it on a higher level position, and I just wasn't prepared to take on that position. Okay. What you want to make sure that you do is that you accept um, some of the responsibility yourself, but you're not saying anything negative against the employer. Uh, Many employers are just kind of waiting. We all understand that careers change, your jobs change, and sometimes not everybody is real happy about the change. You can understand that, provided that you don't blame it on somebody else, whether it be the employer or your coworker. Did you have something you wanted to add to that too, Art?
No, that's perfect. One thing I would add is if you were let go, don't say that you left. I don't
Yes.
say you were fired, but you can say, I was let go because the position was no longer what I was qualified to do, and just explain the situation. The hardest thing with that is not to put emotion into it, because you can totally disagree and be right. By the way, you can be totally right that it was unjust, but that doesn't help you in the interview, because all they're looking for is, do you handle these types of questions in a professional manner, and how will you talk about us, the employer that is potentially hiring you, if we let you go? And that's what they're trying to see, and that takes practice, because I tell you, personal experience, it is really hard not to
Yeah.
want to vent a little bit when someone gives that opportunity. Just two more questions, and then we'll move on.
Yes.
So let's see here. Oh, the other one was, if you're using public transportation and you get to an employer early, how do you handle that? What should you do? Because you're not on
Well,
your own
that's
schedule.
right. That's a really good point. What I would do first off is maybe you could go into a different store or kind of mill around, not creepy kind, but maybe you could try to find something else to do. Let's say the scenario is where you take the bus out to the parking lot, you're dropped off, there is no other place to go but then other than in the parking lot. What you can do at that point is just very slowly walk into the building, use the restroom, take your time, really keep yourself into a positive attitude space. Use that time to maybe do a little bit of meditating just to make sure you are staying on the positive side. And then just slowly go into the place where you're going to tell them you're here for the interview. Again, I still would try to waste those 15, not waste, but try to don't go in there anything more than 15 minutes before. So take that, if say you were there a half hour early, take that additional 15 minutes to use the restroom, catch your breath, kind of catch your thoughts to get yourself mentally prepared for the interview.
I totally agree. I've had people come in 45 minutes early for an interview, and it is just uncomfortable for all involved, and it generally
Yep.
doesn't add anything at all. It detracts. One last question before we move on. If you've had, I have some thoughts on this, but I want to hear Glory's. If you had interviews where the employer runs into technical difficulties with, the platform getting connected, whatever, would it be okay prior to your interview to have the employer do a test run with you?
And that's an excellent question. I would say yes, that it would be just fine to do a test run with the employer, but I don't know that the employer would always have time to do that. So again, you can reach out to us at the Career Force and we'd be happy to do a test run with you. Another thing though that is really super important is when they're calling you for the interview itself and they tell you it's going to be done virtually, it's important at that time to ask, I just have a question. Who do I get a hold of if I end up having some technical difficulties? That happens from time to time. Art and I, through our workshops from time to time, have had technical difficulties, and you want to know how to handle them. So do you call somebody, or do you maybe just wait and have them get a hold of you? But the key is you want to know how to handle it. I want to hear what you
Yeah,
have to say
always
too,
look for
Art.
Yeah, always look for that phone number. I've had a lot of interviews saved by someone giving them a phone number to call. In fact, prior to this workshop, I had someone email me and say, "Hey, is there a call-in number I could use? Because I'm having difficulties getting onto the web application." The key is when there are difficulties, technical difficulties, and they happen a lot, by the way. You can apologize if it's your fault once, but then do the best you can to move on, because the idea of the entire interview is to demonstrate the skills you have towards this job, not to waste your time talking about things that are beyond your control. So just do the best you can. I am of the mind, though, that I would call an employer and say if they could set up, because they probably have interviews before or after. Just like in the information we sent you this for this class, there usually is a test you can run personally to see if you can do Zoom or WebEx or Teams. Asking the employer to do that, I think, would create maybe a bad first impression. But it's again totally up to you. That's just my thoughts.
Yeah, I think I do agree with you too, Art, kind of thinking more about this. And again, please reach out to us because we can help you here at the Career Force to do all of that practicing. In addition, we will practice the interview with you itself. So meaning we'll do a mock interview with you. These are the key interview questions that you'll see here on the screen right now. And I'm going to just touch base on each one of them. First one is typically you'll come into the interview, I'll shake your hand, thank you for coming, and I'll say, so tell me a little bit about yourself. Here's the things that you will say to me. Well, I was born in so and so, and I have this many children, I've been married for this many years, and I just need a job. Now, first off, what does any of that have to do with the job? Okay. I know that you're here interviewing because you need a job. I hope you need a job because I need your help. Okay. But you don't need to speak about that. When it says, tell me about yourself, when I ask you, tell me about yourself, I can't legally ask you if you have children. I can't legally ask you if you're married. I can't legally ask you how old you are. But guess what? When I say, tell me about yourself, you tell me all that stuff. Okay. The reason you're doing that is because it's a natural human behavior. But what I want you to do instead is I want you to tell me about your skills. So I always say when I ask you, tell me about yourself, give yourself permission to tell me three things, three skills about you and that can apply to the job. So for instance, hi Glory, nice to meet you. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself? One I would say is, yes, I am so happy to be here. Thank you for interviewing me. I want to let you know that I am punctual. I am a dependable person and I'm a woman of my word. Okay, so see how there's three things that they're going to be able to apply to the job. Why are you interested in working for this company? That's the time you are to build the employer up, okay, or the interviewer. I would love for you to say at this point, when they say, why are you interested in working for this company? I want you to say, because I know that you guys create an excellent quality product and I want to be a part of that. Or I know that you guys have practiced really good teamwork here and I want to be a part of that team. Okay. What is your major weakness? Please don't say I don't have any. Okay, we're all human beings and we all have weaknesses. But this is where you use the sandwich method again. This is where you're going to take your major weakness and you're going to turn it into something positive. Let me give you an example. What is your major weakness, Glory? Well, I would have to say one of my weaknesses is that I am a perfectionist. Okay, but I have learned that nothing in life is perfect. So instead, what I do now is I do the job to the best of my ability. Okay. What is one of your strengths? Please make sure that you have something you can say there. One of the things that I have found too is that we don't talk on a regular basis like we talk at the interview. So at the interview, I want you to use words like I am. Okay. I am punctual. I am strong. I am healthy. Okay. I am wise. Use what your strengths are through I am statements. Okay. But you have to be able to know your strengths in order to tell me what your strengths are. Can you give an example of how you solved a problem? Okay, that's another great answer to that would be a real life example that again, you're going to play the story that goes on in my head. Okay, where do you see yourself in 3 years? I interviewed a gal one time and it was for a retail position, and she said that she sees herself owning her own retail store. Well, now I didn't hire her. And she interviewed excellent all the way up to that question. No, the reason I didn't hire her is because why am I going to bring somebody in, teach them to trade so that in 3 years they can go down the road and compete with me? No, did she actually do that? I don't know. Okay, but the point is that she didn't end up getting the job just because of that. So where do you see yourself in 3 years? Or they'll say, what are your career aspirations? Or where do you see yourself in 3 to 5 years? The appropriate answer is, I see myself working for you, and hopefully I will have gotten a promotion. Okay, but you want to keep yourself in the position. Employers are going to hire you. They're going to put a lot of time and effort into training you and a lot of time and money into doing that. They don't want you leaving 2 weeks down the road. They want to hire you, train you up, and keep you working with them forever because that's how they make the most money. Okay. How to practice the interview. This is such an important part. And again, you can reach out to us at the Career Force here. We can do mock interviewing for you. A lot of these employers, excuse me, we've talked with too. So we've asked them straight up, what do you want to hear at the interview? Okay, so we know a lot of the answers to some of the questions that they're going to ask you as well. Another thing that you can do is ask a family member or a friend just to go through some of the questions with you to do the practice interviewing. A lot of times it's easy for us to say, I know the answer to that, and I have it up here in my head. But when I start to say it, it doesn't come out quite the way I thought it was going to sound. So it's important for you to practice this. Excuse me. Another thing you can do is even if you can't get together with your friend, you can practice over the phone. Another thing that we always recommend is that you have a mirror so that you can look at the mirror while you're talking if you're doing an interview over the phone. Do you know that it's a proven fact that we can hear you smile? Isn't that interesting? And that's something you can practice with a friend and just say, hey, can you tell if I'm smiling or not? It's amazing how they can tell. Okay, so we call it they can hear you smile. The more you practice, the more flow your answer is going to be. We're taught too as interviewers that when I ask you a question and if you're kind of jerking in your response, jerking or stuttering might be a better word to use. We're taking that as you don't believe, you're not confident in what you're saying. So if you don't believe it, I'm not going to believe it. Okay. So you want to be able to practice. A lot of that can just be nerves. You don't want to not get the job just based off of nerves. Okay. So the more you practice, the easier it's going to be for you. Um, Please make sure that when you do get a hold of the career force too, that you give us a little bit of time to set up an appointment. We are very busy here, but we would be delighted to help you with a mock interview. And I've had people who have called me like the day before and we practiced one more time. They went into the interview and they got the job just based off of the fact that they were confident in what the interviewer wanted to hear. Another new tool that I just learned about today, Art was telling me about it, was on LinkedIn. So you can go onto LinkedIn has an interview prep feature that you can access from the job page. Art, could you possibly put this link into the chat just so that they have it available to them? What this
I tell you
allows you
what,
to
I
do.
will.
Oh, go ahead, Art.
Yeah, I tell you what, I will include that in the follow-up notes, just because
Okay,
I have to look at that. So that will
perfect.
be coming.
Okay,
It's a
great.
great feature that allows you to record you answering. And one of the things you're going to find is that the typical interview has moved a little bit. It's now part of some application processes for companies like United Healthcare and others. What they'll do is they'll have you do a canned or non staffed interview where you're just recording to a video question. That takes a little getting used to. And this LinkedIn option will allow you to record yourself, and it'll give you artificial intelligence feedback based on what it sees as far as expression, tone of voice, how often you interrupt yourself. Something to try is just one of the other features, and it's free.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that is really a neat feature. A lot of times, excuse me, a lot of times we don't know how we sound till you hear yourself recorded too. Post-interview steps. So please make sure you keep your references in the loop of your job search and job interviewing process. So in other words, when you get the interview, I want you to call your references and say, I got the interview, yay. Please make sure that the reference has a copy of the job description that you are interviewing for and has an updated copy of your resume. Highlight the different skills that you have off of the job description. A lot of times when you're talking with your references and you hand them all this information, it's easy for them to say, I didn't even know you could do half of this stuff. Okay. Because again, we don't sit around and talk about all the things that I am and I can do and I'm so great. But at the interview is when you need to do that. That is the appropriate time. And your references need to know your skills. You barely know your skills, so you can't expect your references to know them without you recapping them. Okay. Now, another part of the interview that is so important is at the end of the interview, send a thank you. Now, this could be a card, it could be through email, could be a letter. The key is to send a thank you and get it to the interviewer as quickly as possible. So what I do is I go to the dollar store. Now, again, you can do this however you feel more comfortable with, but I go to the dollar store. I buy a large thank you card, just a regular size. It opens up, says on the front, thank you, opens up and it's blank on the inside. I always put on the right-hand side their name. So if they introduce themselves to me as Mr. Johnson, I refer to them as Mr. Johnson. Okay. If they introduce themselves to me as Bill, then I can refer to them on the thank you note as Bill. However, they introduce themselves to me is how I refer to them. And then I write, thank you for the opportunity to interview with you today. I look forward to hearing from you. Sincerely, Glory. Glory Mitchell. Then on the left-hand side of the card, I have my phone number and my email address right there so that they can call me or get a hold of me as quickly as possible without having to look up my contact information. It's right there in the thank you card, okay? Now, with the pandemic going on, sometimes you're not going to be able to actually give them a thank you card in person. The only way that you can communicate with them is through email. Then that would be how you would send your thank you is through email. Or you can have a letter. Either way, the point is to be ready to get that thank you sent to them as soon as possible. If you're doing an in-person interview, you could always hand the thank you card to the receptionist as you're walking out. There's a reason that they call it snail mail. So remember that the mail is very slow. So you don't know for sure how long it's going to take for them to actually get the thank you. But the important thing is to send one because hardly anybody's doing it anymore. So what that does is it puts your name and your information and your memory back into the employer's mind one more time before they make their decision. Gives you a chance to sell yourself one more time. Art, did you have
Sorry,
something?
I just really want to add to that as someone who has gotten handwritten thank you notes. If you have really good handwriting, and by the way, I don't, so that's why I notice it. If you have excellent handwriting, that is an incredible last impression for them to have of otherwise equally qualified applicants. So remember, when you go into an interview, you're competing against people who met the qualifications. They're looking for reasons to separate one candidate from another. And if it's a toss-up, something as simple as this candidate sent me a thank you card and it was well written and they have excellent penmanship is another value add. Now, it's not the reason they're going to hire you completely, but it could be a tipping factor. And I have to say, it has left a really positive impression with me on multiple occasions. I do have a couple questions to get to, Glory, and I think we have some time to do that. So what kind of jobs will you need letters of recommendation for?
Boy, that's an excellent question. Here's where I stand on that. If you have someone who will give you a letter of recommendation, get it and use it for any type of job that you're applying for at the interview. Or if they ask when you're applying, if at that time they're asking to include letter of recommendations, you can do it right then and there at that time. But there are many different types of jobs that you can use a letter of recommendation for, and some of the jobs do require you have letter of recommendations. Where I've typically seen the letter of recommendation requirements would be when you're working with people. So it could be nursing home, could be counseling, could be CNA, those types of positions, but not all of them, certainly. The point is if you have the opportunity to get one, get it and hang on to it and use it as many times as you can.
One of the things to keep in mind too is when you're following up after an interview, if they didn't specifically ask for a letter of recommendation, maybe you didn't have one at the time, I've used that as an additional follow-up technique for jobs that I've gotten on 2 occasions, actually. I sent them the thank you card, and then a few days later, I said, and to assist you in making your decision, here is a letter of recommendation from my past employer. I don't know if that was what got me the job or not, but I know it didn't hurt. And it's another nice thing you can leave off with an employer. If they don't ask for it, you can leave it with them with a copy of your resume. We did have a couple of questions on that. When you bring 5 copies of your resume to an interview, it's not 5 different versions of your resume. It's 5 copies. I bring 10 myself. I waste a lot of paper that way, but just in case the panel is larger than I anticipated, it's really nice to be able to hand them off. And on 2 occasions, I've had employers say, sorry, I don't have a copy of your resume. I'll some off or something like that, and I've been able to hand them one. Do you have one more question to get to before we wrap it up and then get to the final questions? Any clues on how to read interviewer expressions? One interview had no expression throughout the interview. How do you handle that?
Boy, that's a great question. Here's what matters. It's your body language that matters. Can you read the interviewers? Not always. And sometimes they are just trained to be stone-faced, so you cannot read them. The key is to not let them ruffle you, and you still carry on appropriate body language. So you're still going to practice good eye contact, still going to smile. One of the things that I do is I tend to use my hands a lot. So when I'm interviewing, I will put them in my lap and fold them together just because it reminds me to keep them together. Your body language is more important than theirs. So just try not to get hung up on what they're doing, because sometimes you're not going to be able to read them at all. That's part of the reason why they're the interviewer. It's because they're trained in what they're doing and they're doing it very well, so that it's not to give you an impression either way. And it's kind of unfortunate, but it is part of the interview process in some cases. Art, do you have any more questions?
Yes, I did have one more that came through, and I've heard this multiple times throughout the last year. How do you suggest handling a situation where an employer asks for a skill you don't have? Like say, in this case specifically with a computer skill, and we'll use the example of they want Photoshop, and you've got graphic image manipulation program, so an open source program. So you have a similar skill set to what they need, but you don't have the actual skill. How do you make that connection for employers?
That's an excellent question. And like Art said, we're seeing this more and more. What you're talking about is transferable skills. So you might have skills in a certain program that you could take some of the skills that you used in that program and transfer them into a new program. But when you're actually at the interview and they say, do you have skills in this certain program, and you truly don't, I want you to be honest with them and say, I don't have skills in that program. However, I do have some skills that I can transfer from this other program. But in addition to that, I want you to take a course before your first day of employment. Now, at the Career Force, we have a lot of different resources that we can connect you with that you could do a refresher course in the new program. Hopefully, we can find that. And most of them are free. So we can connect you with some of that learning as well. But you can also use the words at the interview, you know, I'm more than willing to reskill myself into the program that you're using. I would be more than willing to do that outside of work hours if I can get on and actually learn online. Another thing that I found was really a value was when people would say to me, you know, I don't know how to do that, but I love to learn. I don't know how to do that, but I'm willing to learn. I don't know how to do that, but you can go ahead and teach me and I'll do it the way you want me to do it. Okay, those are the type of people that I could work with a lot easier than someone who came in and said, well, that's not the way I was taught how to do it, or that's not the way we do it around here. Okay, so do you see how you can be a benefit even though you might not know how to do the entire job? The fact that you're willing to learn how to do it the way I want you to do it, it holds a lot of weight in the interview itself.
Yes, willingness to learn also speaks to acceptance of change. And that is a huge part of every job. And it's something I bring up in every interview is that I adapt to the needs. You're going to have to be trained into every single new job you get. No matter how much experience you bring to that job, they're going to have to train you in. So training is part of it. I'd like to spend the last few minutes here on dealing with questions you can ask employers. So in the interview, it's a two-stage process, or it's a two-way process. They're asking you questions, but what are some good questions you can ask the employer about their culture, their way of doing things that could leave a good impression?
Well, I guess the one question that I always want you to ask is, when are you looking to fill the position? Okay. That is a really good one that you need to know. You want to know the answer to. If it's 3 months from now, you're going to starve to death. Okay. But another question that you can ask is, how did you get this job? Okay. That is a great way you can ask the interviewer that. Could you tell me what your favorite part of the day is? Okay. There's all different types in our handouts that we're sending you. There is a section in there about questions that you can ask the employers as well. It is very, very important that you do have some questions to ask. For one reason, it gets the dialogue going between you and the interviewer. It's also a great way to connect with the interviewer. And then in addition to that, it shows that you're very interested in the job. Okay. Art, did you have a couple questions that you would like to throw out there for what you would ask the employer when you're interviewing?
Well, two things. One, always have more questions prepared than you're actually going to ask. And the reason for
Yes.
that is if at the end of an interview, someone says, we know I had a few questions, but you've basically answered all of them. That's a really bad ending to maybe what was otherwise a good interview. So I'd like to have 5 to 7 questions put together that I can ask that draws an interviewer into talking about their experience with the company. So something like, describe to me what makes someone successful at your company. That is a great question that gets them thinking. It's not a yes, no. We don't ask about salary. We don't ask about benefits. I know that's the hardest thing not to ask because it's the #1 question on everyone's mind. But the research you do in the company will help you to understand a little bit about that. And then at offer, those are the questions where you get into negotiation. I did have another quick question to answer. This happens in every one of our workshops. People ask, how do we address being unemployed during COVID? Employed than ever before. My feeling on that is we kind of get a get out of jail free card on this more than we have in the past. Nearly everyone looking for work now has a reason. It might not be the exact reason, but they're dealing with multiple or almost universal people with gaps in work history right now.
Yes.
So the key is If you have an explanation, fine, you can go into a little bit, but employers understand. Don't focus on that. Focus on what you bring to this job from your past work experience. Now, if it's 3 to 5 years, that's something different, and you're going to have to identify that. And the best advice I can give is have a direct conversation about your specific situation with a career force specialist. I'll be giving everyone the contact information for all 50 sites. The reason we ask you to contact the local one is, in my case, I live in Twig, Minnesota. If you even know where that is, good for you. I can't give you information about Winona and Thief River Falls and Bemidji employers. Your local career force person is specially to understand the needs of the local economy. Let's finish up, and I just want to say personally, thank you so much, everyone, for coming today. The recorded version of this will be available and emailed out to you by the end of the day tomorrow.
Yes, great. Thank you so much, Art. Some very awesome words of wisdom. We also want to remind you that next week, which would be the 27th, which is next Tuesday, from 10 to 11, we are going to be offering the internet and social media LinkedIn. So we want to encourage you to join that. And we are just very grateful and thankful that you could come to our workshop today. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to let us know. Keep an eye out for the follow-up email that's going to be coming. When you do get that follow-up email, it'll have our contact information in there as well. So thank you and good luck at the job interview. Have a wonderful day.